I'm Autumn Lockett.
And this is Mitch Randall.
And you're listening to Good Faith Weekly.
Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Autumn and I are going to catch up. We're going to be talking about what's going on across the country in courtrooms dealing with race. We're also going to be talking about what took place in San Antonio, Texas over the weekend with former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn calling for one religion. And then we're also going to be talking about a little bit about the infrastructure bill. And Autumn and I are going to talk about where I'm going to be this weekend in Louisville, Kentucky at the Festival of Faiths. And then later on in the podcast, Autumn and I sat down with Hoekstra and Jonathan Walton as they have started their very own press called Keeping the Faith Press. And it is a delightful conversation. They're also the co-hosts of Shake the Dust podcast that you'll want to tune into as well. So stay tuned. It's going to be a good show. Hey, Autumn, guess what time of year it is?
Halloween.
No.
Thanksgiving?
No.
It's too early for Christmas. People keep telling me.
It is a little too early for Christmas. No, it's the time of year when nonprofits ask for money.
You know, Mitch, I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, it is an exciting time of year because even here at Good Faith Media, we need to, from time to time, ask our listeners and readers to help support this great effort of keeping this message alive.
Yeah, the voices of inclusive people of faith are tragically underrepresented, leaving many feeling alone. And then we layered in this global pandemic, which pushed all of us further into isolation. But Good Faith Media provides a space for our voices to unite and impact the world for good.
And our daily news and opinion pieces provide thoughtful reflection from spiritual and thoughtful leaders around the world.
Our Nurturing Faith Journal is a print magazine that circulates 6 times a year to churches and households nationwide, delivering thoughtful analysis, inspiring features, and Jesus-focused Bible study curriculum.
And if you like this podcast, Good Faith Weekly, make certain to subscribe to more exciting and challenging podcasts brought to you by the Good Faith Media Podcast Network. Gather around your device as GFM continues advocating for inclusion for all, justice for all, and freedom for all. You can find more information about this at goodfaithmedia.org/donate. Autumn, what's going on in your world these days?
Well, Mitch, we found out that to celebrate Thanksgiving holiday next week, our kids are all 4 out of school for 5 whole days.
Oh, glorious. I mean, it's going to be it's going to be like the old nostalgia days during the pandemic where everybody was together at once.
Yes. In fact, there's going to be lots of child noise on our meetings next week. I'm just telling you in advance right now. There's going to be some squawking. You know, there's been some mooning on behalf of
I was going to say, as long as everybody keeps their pants on in your house.
I make no promises about that. We have a little bit of kid noise this week, sort of in preparation for that, too, in our interview later.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, Autumn and I get to sit down with Hoekstra and Jonathan Walton later on, and Jonathan's little daughter interrupts our interview, and she is just adorable. So you'll hear her in the background, just very precious. So, you know, that's...
Well, she was scheduled to be napping, but, you know, kids never really do what they're scheduled to do. No.
She got off the schedule. So she's fine. Oh, well, lots going on in our country these days, Autumn. Let's start with some of the court cases that are underway. One in Kenosha, Wisconsin, the other one down in Georgia. First, the Rittenhour case. Kyle Rittenhour was accused and tried for the murdering of 2 individuals during a protest in Kenosha in 2020, injuring another via gunfire. And so now it's gone to the trial. We're recording this podcast on Wednesday. We do not know if there's a verdict as of yet, but lots of things have transpired during the trial. Certainly seems as though, to me at least, that things are looking good for Kyle and not really looking good for justice, because it seems as though he may get off on this.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think based on the privilege of his skin color, he's even at a trial. I think we discussed that a little bit last week. You know, if a black youth had gone into a crowd with an automatic rifle, they would not have lived to tell the tale or to plead any kind of a case. And so I I'm just going to continue to pray for justice in that case, and I'm also not hopeful.
Right. And the whole defense about he felt like his life was threatened, and I'm quite
Well, then he should
certain.
have just stayed home.
Well, and that to me that's an important fact, because it's not like he was in his home and someone broke into his home and he felt like his life was threatened, or if he found himself out in a normal circumstance, to dinner and somebody tried to rob him. But he put himself in this circumstance. He brought a weapon to this circumstance and was the aggressor. I mean, he was the aggressor in this particular scenario. And so what happens when an individual puts themselves in a position where they feel like their life is threatened? I'm also getting a little tired of just, that's the go-to now. All you have to say is, well, I felt like my life was threatened. And if you're white in this country, you get a free pass.
Right. But if you're a Black person, your life can feel threatened literally anywhere, even in your home asleep. So where's the narrative there? Who's telling that story?
Exactly.
We are. That's who.
That's exactly right. We are calling attention to all of these injustices across our country. And, our colleague, Reverend Starlette Thomas, has been doing it for over a decade now with her Raceless Gospel Initiative, and does a great job breaking down race as a human construct, but also seeing the nuances of racism and systemic racism within this country that have forever been here and continue their presence in society. So if you really want to know what's going on with racism, both overt and systemic racism, go on over to the Raceless Gospel podcast. She just does a great job outlining it and preaching. I mean, she preaches.
Yeah.
And it's a great listen. Well, also going on in Georgia, it seems as though there's another case. Ahmaud Arbery was killed on a run by 3 white men. Those 3 white men are now on trial down there. And something interesting happened during the case as Reverend Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson showed up to the courtroom to sit with Ahmaud's family. One of the defense attorneys said this on record in open court, that he did not want any more Black pastors in the courtroom. How much more overt can you get than that?
Well, for everyone saying it out loud, there are, 100 more who are thinking it inside. So it's just preposterous that you would say something like that you would think something like that. And you know what? I'm sort of in the camp of, I would like as many Black pastors as I could possibly fit in a courtroom or whatever room I'm in.
Yeah, 100%. Maybe even on the jury every now and again. That'd be nice.
It would be nice, right? Yeah. No, it's just preposterous.
Well, we don't know the outcome of either one of those cases right now, but I do say this in all sincerity. We do pray for each one of those circumstances. We know that there's a lot of emotion when the verdict is rendered, whether guilty or innocent in either one of those cases, there's going to be a response. And so our prayer is that whatever the verdict might be, that we can, as a society, continue to see where we fell, especially where we fell the least of these and the marginalized and oppressed, and that we can change this system in ways that justice can rain down, because right now our system is broken.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Well, not only is our system broken, but there are people who are at this current time overtly working to break it even further. And we saw one of those instances down in San Antonio, Texas over the weekend at Cornerstone Church. At John Hagee's church. John Hagee is a noted right-wing fundamentalist preacher in Texas. He's also a Christian nationalist, Christian Zionist. He invited the former National Secretary Advisor in the Trump administration, Michael Flynn, to his church, as Michael Flynn is now on tour, it seems as though, after committing crimes and being pardoned by the former president. Now he gets to go make a living espousing all this BS that he believes in. One of those.
I was going to say, what are you going to call it, Mitch?
I paused there.
Over the radio edit button.
One of the things he said is that if he believes in one nation, or that he believes in one nation under God, and the only way to achieve that one nation under God is to have one religion. So, as you can imagine, it's going to be his religion, his interpretation of what that religion might be, and that all other interpretations, all other practices, all other religions need to be thrown out the wayside and follow his religion. Craziness. I mean, for anybody who doubts Christian nationalism exists in this country, that's it. And I'm tired of people saying, well, that's just rhetoric. Well, guess what? Rhetoric turns into action. We saw that on January 6th. This kind of rhetoric, this kind of theology, this kind of politicking is dangerous. It's absolutely dangerous.
And it's pervasive.
Very pervasive.
Yeah, and we have to continue to shine a light on it and to speak out against it because it's not okay. And here's the thing. Even if, the Flynn-Hagee co-opted religion of whatever it is came together and then suddenly everyone had to be that, even if it sounds cushiony and wonderful to you now because you think that's my power, that, that would be good for me, how long until it turns into something that isn't good for you? We have to have balance. We have to have multiple voices. We have to have freedom of and from religion in our country.
Absolutely. Over at our good friends, Baptist News Global this week, the executive director for the Baptist Joint Committee wrote an op-ed over at their site, and it's fabulous, addressing this one religion mentality that Flynn is propagating. And so we encourage you to go over to their site to read Amanda's article. It's just very well done. Mm-hmm. But this has got to stop. I'm just tired of it. I know it's not going to stop. It's going to ramp up as we enter the midterm elections. The genie is out of the bottle. And so we need to continue to vocalize opposition to this, to demonstrate that diversity and dialogue are the only true way forward. And we need to celebrate that. And in the famous words of the paradox, the only thing that we need to be intolerant about is intolerance. And so we need to continue along that mantra. Well, one last thing before we get to our interview, Autumn. Washington did something kind of cool this week. They actually passed a bipartisan bill.
They did. Yes. I wasn't around during the New Deal. Mitch, were you?
I was just a wee. But
that's what it sort of feels like to me.
Yeah. I mean, obviously they had opposition, both on the left, on the right, I might say. But for once, lawmakers came together. They saw that this was desperately needed. I mean, it's infrastructure. I mean, it should not be that controversial because all you have to do is go on I-35 here in Oklahoma and look at a bridge. And I mean, literally here in Norman, there was a time over I-35 where you drove over a bridge. There was a hole in it. You could see the highway on the bridge that you were on. And
I had a chip from an overpass, like a rock fall from an overpass and chip my windshield.
Yeah. I mean, our infrastructure is falling apart. And you look at the rest of the world that has invested in infrastructure and transportation. I mean, it's crazy that we don't have high-speed rail in America. Mm-hmm. I mean, just absolutely crazy. And so there are things that we can do and invest as a country that's going to push us forward. And I think Republicans and Democrats both see that. So it was refreshing to see the president sign the infrastructure bill with bipartisan support. I really appreciated it. It gives me hope.
Yeah, it does. And it's, one thing that we're doing that's actually looking out for one another. Doesn't that feel good?
It does, absolutely. Because we all drive on these roads,
We do. We all rely on this transportation, both for, the movement of goods and people. And it's just good form.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of good form, you and I got to sit down with Hoekstra and Jonathan Walton this week, and their new venture, Keeping the Faith Press and Shake the Dust podcast. They were absolutely delightful. I mean, we just really enjoyed our time with them, and I hope that you enjoy this interview as well. Like I said before, we recorded this a little early because I'm going to be on the road at the Festival of Faiths this week, Autumn.
You better save me a corn dog and a turkey leg.
It's not that kind of festival.
Oh. What are you going to do? There's not a Ferris wheel?
There's not.
Oh my gosh, a Ferris wheel of faith, Mitch. TM. I'm taking that one right now.
You got it. No, our colleague that we mentioned a moment ago, Reverend Starlet Thomas, and I are going to Louisville to attend the Festival of Faiths because they're going to be talking about race during this festival. And they've invited scholars from all over Kentucky to come and talk about the issue of race and its human construct, or talked about race as a human construct and how we can deconstruct that and really pursue a better way forward. So we're really excited about it. We want to encourage you to look at some of our interviews at goodfaithmedia.org. Starlet and I are going to sit down with some of the speakers and presenters there, interviewing them one-on-one. So stay tuned. We're really excited about what comes from that. We think it's going to be a good time, and we're going to learn a lot sitting down and talking with those pastors and scholars. Well, stay tuned for this interview. I want to remind you after the interview that Autumn and I are going to be gone next week. It's Thanksgiving week, so we're going to take the week off, but we'll be coming back the week after Thanksgiving. And got some really exciting stuff. May have an interview or two from Starlet at the Festival of Faiths in Louisville. But if we don't talk to you between now and then, we'll talk to you after Thanksgiving. And so we hope that each and every one of you have a very happy Thanksgiving and enjoy your family.
I'm Reverend Starlet Thomas, Director of the Raceless Gospel Initiative at Good Faith Media and host of the Raceless Gospel podcast. The Advent season is coming, and we're delivering a podcast. Jesus is Coming. It's an Advent podcast series from us at Good Faith Media. We'll drop 4 episodes, one for each Sunday of Advent. A season of preparation for a kingdom that is coming. Back up! Give everyone some space. There is plenty good room. Come one, come all, to Jesus. Jesus is Coming, an Advent podcast series by me, Reverend Starlet Thomas. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Learn more at goodfaithmedia.org.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we've got some very special guests with us. A return guest, Hoekstra, is the public defender in the child welfare system in New York City. He previously was a staff attorney at the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. He graduated cum laude from New York University School of Law in 2014. Spent a year organizing college students for political advocacy in Washington, D.C. with International Justice Mission. Jonathan Walton is a newcomer to the pod. He is a senior resource specialist with InterVarsity's Multi-Ethnic Initiatives Department. He leads InterVarsity's experiential discipleship team, which exists to develop and commission leaders with the character and capacity to partner with God to change the world. Experiential discipleship and spiritual formation are key components to making sure that happens. He lives in Queens with his wife, 2 daughters, and a dog. Jonathan recently started a new online venture called Keeping the Faith Press, aimed at creating a space for Christians of all stripes to center and elevate marginalized voices in order to firmly plant ourselves in God's kingdom and leave a colonized Western Christianity. They're also the co-host of a new podcast called Shake the Dust. Jonathan, welcome to Good Faith Weekly.
Hey, thanks so much for having us.
Thank you so much for having us. And I hope that siren in the background.
I just hope they're not coming for you, If not, this podcast is about to get real interesting.
Suddenly it's a true crime podcast, and I have been training my whole life for this.
I immediately.
So how did you two feel compelled to launch Keeping the Faith Press? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, so what actually got us started was the person who was on your podcast last time with me, which was Susie LaHood, got in contact with us about the anthology that we published last year before the election that kind of consisted of a lot of Christians from many different walks of life writing about why they were not voting for Donald Trump. And, her compulsion was out of just kind of a dedication that someone needed to sort of put the record straight, that what so much of what was going on in especially white evangelicalism, but a lot of white Christianity in the United States was wrong. It was just not where the church should be going. And I think that's a lot of the compulsion of what happened after we published that book and thought, oh, well, we have this little LLC we created. What else can we do with it? How can we build off this momentum and, shake the dust? Obviously that kind of biblical imagery of leaving behind people who will not listen to the word of God, I think is kind of how we got started. And, a lot of it for me is trying to live with more integrity, right? With trying to live with more adhering closer to the things that I know in my heart and that we know in our hearts are the things that Jesus wants us to be following, as opposed to the things that America and all these other idols that we integrate so seamlessly into our faith sometimes want us to be following. But I'm sure that one of the good things about our podcast and our stuff in general is that we come from very different perspectives. So I'm sure Jonathan has a little bit of a twist on that.
So what I hear, before Jonathan speaks, what I hear Cy saying is that the non-reelection of President Trump was directly associated with keeping the faith book. Is that right, Cy? I mean, you had a direct...
oh, absolutely.
I mean, it was all because of that book that Trump wasn't reelected.
Could you guys get on the pandemic next?
Christian objections to the existence of the pandemic.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes, that'd be great.
So Jonathan, I mean, we're here to talk about this refocusing of the church and how the political, this hyper partisanship, this toxic political venture that the church is engaged in, how we combat that and invite people back to following Jesus, following the Word of God. But I think we've come a long way, and I think sometimes we've turned a corner. But then instances like this past week in San Antonio, Texas, where former Deputy Security Advisor Michael Flynn was at John Hagee's church and basically called for one religion, and the crowd burst into an inflammatory remark against President Biden. Sometimes I feel like we have turned a corner. Sometimes I feel like we haven't. So what do you think? How can keeping the faith help us pull us out of this predicament we're in?
That church better be paying taxes next week, right? I'm just saying.
Exactly.
It would be great if that stream of quote unquote Christian ministry paid taxes, because they rake in a significant amount of money.
They do.
That's another podcast. I think that it'd be exceptionally helpful downstream of like Enlightenment thought to lift how we think about brokenness in the world from getting better or getting worse to just being the state of things. And there's moving, instead of moving from like left to right or A to B, there's just an orientation around Jesus and people who are not oriented around Jesus. And there are points in life and potential where we're closer to that, but not closer to how things should be, but closer to God. And then there are places when they're not. And I think it's impossible for a group of people downstream of institutions and individuals that worship race, class, and gender-based hierarchy to do something other than have Michael Flynn show up and say, let's go, Brandon, and say F Joe Biden. Like there isn't a point where they are progressing, right? Mm-hmm. I got an email from a ministry partner, and he said, I'm so excited about the things that are happening. And with progressive Christianity, it seems like there are going to be people that are just so much more receptive to the message you guys are bringing. And I think that the myth of progressivism, that things are getting better, is really, really unhelpful for actually dealing with the realities of the world. Like The fall happened. Jesus is risen. He is coming back. We are waiting and active. That's just how it is.
Mm.
And that, I think, it actually liberates us from the desire from being beholden emotionally, spiritually, all that stuff. I like this, a constant evaluation from assessing that. We don't have to assess that. I mean, and to harken back, the reason that I wanted to be a part of KTF is because to me, it's an extension of what I was doing with 12 Lies That Hold America Captive and the Truth That Sets Us Free. And that book, I just explained in great detail how the actual faith of John Hagee and these people is white American folk religion, not Christianity.
Sure.
And I think also if we were able to wrap our minds around it, this is a completely different faith. Right. Then again, we would be able to step away from thinking, like far, like closer or further away, or A to B or better. It's just, that is just not following Jesus.
Sure.
It's just not.
And I love that language, Jonathan, that you're using, because one of our colleagues here at Good Faith Media, Johnny Pierce, has been talking about what he calls the Jesus Worldview Initiative. And it was a response to the rhetoric that we heard for several decades, especially from conservative Christianity, right-wing fundamentalism, of trying to follow a biblical worldview. Well, what happened in that conversation was that somehow Jesus got pushed out of the worldview, and a worldview was created that was based upon the Bible. But as I've always said, you can take the Bible and prove about anything or argue about anything you want. And when Jesus was left out of that, it became more of a socio-political movement that was striving for power and wealth in this country at the subjugation of other people. And so what Johnny's trying to do is to not only reintroduce Jesus into the conversation, but make Jesus the focal point of who we are as a people of faith. So, Sai, what do you think? I mean, do you think as people of faith that that message has potential? That somehow there is a huge difference between a biblical worldview and a Jesus worldview?
That is an interesting thought, because I think where I start with that is I grew up definitely within the purview of the worldview ministries of kind of the 90s and 2000s. And I think your colleague is right that there is a degree to which, while obviously trying to figure out how you view the world through the lens of the things that Jesus said and what the Bible says is a good exercise, what it often did functionally was to exclude anybody who didn't, agree with it. It was trying to define the purview of what is real, true, and good Christianity within a political framework. Mm-hmm. And I think, so it functioned to exclude people, and it functioned to exclude a lot of people that it really did not need to exclude. Mm-hmm. It was just so tied to a certain political view, to a certain economic outlook, a geopolitical view, that I think it was troubling in that way. And I agree, you lose Jesus in all that. And one of the ways that you lose Jesus in all that, in particular, is by failing to, as we say at KTF, center and elevate marginalized voices, right? So that is not what biblical worldview people are trying to do ever. Right. I mean, it's the phrase biblical worldview in and of itself wouldn't tell you that, but that was not what was happening with those ministries. Right. And it was all about the philosophy and theology of Europeans and Americans. And, so it was just an unnecessary exclude. There's a lot of suspicion in that movement toward, especially toward the Black church, but toward any kind of theology that talked about justice, toward any kind of theology that was perceived as being biased, that was because it was too like emotionally invested in something or other, right? Like this is a response that we get a lot of times to. Jonathan and I were just talking about this yesterday. A response that you get a lot of times to Black Lives Matter, people who want police reform or anything. It's like you Black people who are advocating for this are too emotionally tied to this issue. You're not thinking about it objectively, quote unquote. I just did air quotes. And that's, kind of seeing like the whiteness, conservatism, like European centric thought as an objective default, and everything else as an emotional response as something else. And I think the way that bringing in Jesus and a Jesus centered worldview solves for that problem is that Jesus never did that. You're never going to find Jesus saying to a poor person, "Oh, you don't understand economic oppression properly because you're too emotional." You know what I mean? He didn't say to Jewish people, "Oh, you don't get the Roman imperial system because you're a victim of it."
Right.
You know? And what he said all the time though was he used people's positions of power and privilege and said that is actually going to lead you into some sort of misunderstanding, right? Into some sort of incorrect evaluation of your own power. It's going to lead you to arrogance. It's going to lead you to pride. And so, that was, I'm not sure that was the direction you expected.
No, that's exactly. That's exactly.
That
and Jonathan mentioned a moment ago, this idolatry that the church possesses. So, Jonathan, what do you mean by idolatry, and what idols do you think that the church is worshiping other than the God that they're there to worship?
Lord have mercy. How long do we have? Okay. So I think, Reverend Dr. Soon-Chung Ra and Mark Charles, their work on the doctrine of discovery, like I think there's that blows it up a little bit more for people who need to go read more books. Richard Twist, Rescuing the Gospel from the Cowboys, I think is another great book or person to know and follow. But if I was to pick a point biblically and say, what's the idol, I would go to Revelation 18. And Revelation 18 is when that idol is destroyed. And so there's a group of people who I think we embody, and we have a choice. So in Revelation 18, Babylon is destroyed. The great, the beast or whatever is dying. And what happens is there's a group of people weeping over Babylon. And what it says is that the merchants, the people who once profited off of her ships and captives and all these different things are devastated that Babylon is being destroyed. And I don't want to be a part of that group of people. Because in Revelation 19, it says, all praise, honor, and glory be to God. Right. And I think what we're actually worshiping is the thing that what's the name? James Cameron, the Left Behind series, all the rage about. We're actually worshiping that right now. And like Martin Luther King would say, racism, militarism, or materialism. I would say race, class, gender. But the reality is there's a worship of power and accumulation that we embrace, sanctify, and then indoctrinate people into. And so I think if we were, again, to grab another biblical passage, it would be Daniel, right? Daniel is trafficked as a child into Babylon. His name is changed. He's given a different faith, and he's told how he's going to live. And essentially, that is what happened to my people. I'm Black. If you Black listeners know I'm Black, by the way, I'm talking. Other people, there are, like, I'm a Black American. And so the reality is, like, there's something that happens when you invited people to change their names, to get involved in a system that determines morality, destiny, beauty, love, and justice. And God ordains those things. And if you're going to define ththose things, you can't have God in the picture because you become God.
Sure.
And that gets back to what you were saying before about the objective worldview, like the creation of this quote unquote biblical worldview in alignment with European expansion and imperialism. Like, you have to create that so you can subjugate everything else. Otherwise, if you invite a different set of objective questions and morals, and you can be challenged. And the reality is that white supremacy is supremacy. You can't challenge it because it's supreme. And so I think at the end of the day, if we were to expand this beyond the scope of European imperialism, it would be the worship of power and accumulation as our source of value and significance and meaning.
Under the guise of bless me indeed.
Yes, exactly.
And prosperity gospel, which I love when you were first talking earlier, that the goal isn't easy, cushiony, everyone's wonderful. Like, that's not the goal. That's not attainable. God is in those hard places, and we have to be too.
Right. It's impossible to leave college. I mean, me and Sai both went to Columbia University. They are not saying take up your cross, deny yourself, and follow me. That is not what I got in the line for JP Morgan Chase Consulting summer jobs. I lasted a very short amount of time there, but it's just not it. And so it's a fundamentally different way of life, which is again why I say worship. I think another word for worship is orientation. What are we orienting our lives, our passions, our patterns around?
And you've just written a book about this, right?
I did. Yes.
So go ahead and plug the book, Jonathan. That's why you're here.
So I think 12 Lies is about, that orientation, but I think our anthology expands upon that, because I think what we do with Christianity is we create Christian monoliths, right? So one person said this, when in our anthology, you have 37 like activists, pastors, leaders, folks from all across the church who represent every ethnic background.
A great cloud of witnesses, if you will. Not to get all Hebrews on you. But
I'll go there, right? Speaking like faith is the subject of things hoped for, evidence of things not seen, trying to imagine something different. And so I would say that that book has, folks that you can grab onto today that are pretty great. So. Lord Jesus. Yes. That only took like 2 or 3 minutes.
No, it did. Absolutely.
So we'll have links to the book in our show notes.
Yeah.
Okay, but I will just tell you guys that not only does like our culture and our society not know what to do with us, but we've been working with some nonprofits and some like search engine optimization, social media optimization folks. The algorithms of social media doesn't know what to do with Christians who don't think within that monolith. They don't know what to do with us. Because we don't fit into any of the code. You can't write code for it. It's messy. It's messier than a Facebook algorithm. It's messier than a tract that you throw in somebody's face when they're struggling. Right? And it's hard.
Which is why I get ads for Let's Go Brandon in my Instagram, Facebook feed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's
fun times on social media.
Well, part of your objective with KTF and Shake the Dust is to build a genuine intersectional community. So, Sai, how are you and Jonathan achieving this?
I mean, I think the first thing that we're trying to do right now is model it on the show. So it's Jonathan and I and Susie LaHood, who was the guest last time I was here, are the co-hosts. And one thing that Jonathan is particularly good at, because he's been doing it for a very long time, is engaging across kind of lines of difference in an emotionally healthy way. Like Jonathan has put years into thinking about this and to doing like his own personal therapy around this, all kinds of things. So the three of us, I'm a blind white man, Susie's a white woman, Jonathan's a black man. We're all in interracial marriages. We've all spent a very long time in other cultures, talking across lines of race, like in multi-ethnic communities. Just by coincidence, the three of us ended up in places where we've been doing this for, 10, 15 years or so. And so we are just trying to be vulnerable and honest and humble while talking to each other, which means Jonathan this is actually Jonathan's brother, who's a pastor in Virginia. It basically talks about vulnerability in terms of transparency plus risk. So being transparent in a way that is sort of trying to not necessarily cost you something enormous, but is risky, right? Is not necessarily comfortable, doing it in an emotionally healthy way, and being willing to demonstrate grace and peace to each other when we screw up, which is inevitable. And we do it like kind of regularly. And I tried to model that for people like on a show. And then we bring that, we bring in guests and try and do the same thing with them, and people who are experts in various ways that we want to teach people to do that. And then we also kind of focus on basically it's the two things that we divide what we're doing into are like discipleship and political education. So I think we've sort of been covering the discipleship, and then we're also like, we have a weekly newsletter, and we try and, bring people kind of curated like articles, videos, documentaries, whatever that we think are interesting for people to get to just understand the world around them better, because a lot of that knowledge, just knowledge of what's happening around you, stuff that's unfamiliar to you, is going to help in creating that sort of intersectional community.
Sure.
Because you just can't love what you don't know.
So, Jonathan, when I come to an intersection, two things happen. One, I arrive the same time as another driver, and we get frustrated with one another because we start one wants to go, the other wants to go, and then we end up honking at one another. Or something else happens. We're all polite and, well, you go. No, well, you go. And then nothing happens. So in this idea of intersectional community, there has to be a model for us to be productive, to have conversations and to move forward as a community. What are some suggestions that you have when people find themselves at an intersection with someone who's different than them, but there's a commonality, whether that is experience or just individualism,
or you're related and Thanksgiving is next week,
or that? What are some suggestions of being productive at these moments that we find ourselves in intersection?
Yeah. Driving to a four-way stop sign in New York City is a perfect analogy. And so I think there's three things that are happening for us that are abstract, and then I'll give like three practical things. Okay. I think we have to resist pride. We have to resist narcissism, and we have to resist hurry. And so if we're prideful and we think we're right all the time, we'll be self-referencing. So everything's about us, orients around us, including the entire world, like folks at the intersection. And then we just do it quickly because there's no reason to slow down because we haven't considered anybody else around us. And it's impossible to love your neighbor if you won't even consider them. Yeah, their thoughts, their feelings, their emotions, the things that are going on around them. So that's the first thing. Like, I think we need to identify the places where we are prideful and resistant to learning, like resistant to criticism. And like scripture literally calls people who don't want to receive feedback fools, right? Like, you're a fool. You don't try to actually like receive these things. Wise is the person who receives good instruction. And so that's the first thing. The second thing about like narcissism is like, again, like if we are oriented around ourselves, we cannot be oriented around the way and life of Jesus. Like Romans 12 says, do not be conformed to the patterns of the world, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And this is how we test and prove what God's perfect good and perfect will is, right? And so it's impossible to be oriented towards loving other people as long as we're oriented towards loving our false selves. And that's like a whole nother thing, right? But if our self is informed by pride and being over other people, then we're not actually loving ourselves. We're loving the projection of ourselves that we want other people to see, right? And so if we resist the pride, the narcissism, and the hurry, then we can slow down and do three practical things. And the practical thing definitely has to do with Thanksgiving, which I'll be on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and all the things talking about next week, is like, when you interact with someone, again, my brother, pastor of East End Fellowship in Richmond, Virginia, it is impossible not to interact with someone and not interact with their family for 3 generations. Like let's just assume you're interacting with addiction, with estrangement, with brokenness, with trauma. Like, let's just assume that, which should invite you to be gracious, right? And so this is that. The first thing is just go off that assumption. The second thing is to ask open-ended questions, not yes and no questions, and questions you genuinely want the answer to. Some of us ask questions that we don't care about what the person is going to say back to us, which is incredibly rude and dismissive and unbiblical, right? And so I would say consider the person's family and background as you're interacting with them, because you can't get away from that, and to listen reflectively after asking questions open-ended questions you actually want the answer to. And the last thing that I would say is what would be exceptionally helpful is to share yourself. And most of us, I think, are not willing to share of ourselves. So when someone says, how are you? Be honest and say, you know what? Life's really shitty right now because I think Ahmaud Arbery, the people who killed him, are going to walk free, even though everybody after them won't walk free because they changed the law, right? Or it's like, it's going to suck in Kenosha because when Rittenhouse gets off and leaves, there's going to be rioting And then people are going to come with guns. And then we're going to have 15 trials of 15 Rittenhouses who shot other people because Rittenhouse got off.
Yeah.
Like, that's actually what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
You know, and now granted, the person might look at you with their eyes wide open after that, but at least you were honest and not, you know, you didn't lie to them.
Yeah.
And I do think people are looking for honesty on me.
I agree with that 100%, Jonathan. I mean,
and
just
so does Everest.
Yeah. Everest does agree with that as well. You know, we have danced around these issues. This is why we're still in this predicament. We haven't been honest with ourselves. We haven't been honest with others. And we just need to be honest and have genuine, authentic conversations so that, you know, we can not only have these conversations, but listen to other people as well as hopefully they will listen to us. Well, Cy, Hoekstra, Jonathan, Walton, you have been an absolute delight today for us at Good Faith Weekly, co-founders of Keeping the Faith Press, as well as co-hosts of Shake the Dust podcast. For our audience, go ahead and go on over to Shake the Dust and hit subscribe right now, because it's a great podcast. They do a great job talking about these things and creating this intersectional community. But guys, before we go, we've got one last question that we want to ask both of you. Autumn asked every guest this question, so I'm going to let her take it away.
Yes, our tagline at Good Faith Media is "There's more to tell." So, Cy, why don't you go first, and then Jonathan, let us know your more to tell.
Sure. So, we have a lot more to tell. I'll do the practical stuff maybe, and I'm sure Jonathan will say something extremely powerful and drop the mic, and we'll all be done. We are at ktfpress.com, and we put out a weekly newsletter. We write articles. We put out this podcast, and we just so badly want people to come join us in what we're doing, because we think it is crucial work. It's not, I know we joked about the book and the election before. We don't think we're saving the country or anything. We just think that we have found so much like beauty and camaraderie and goodness, just like God's goodness, and what in this kind of work that we're doing. And we would love to see people over there at ktfpress.com. We're also all the social media at KTF Press. And we would just love to see you there.
And Cy, don't sell yourself short. I mean, my goodness, the book was fantastic. Anybody who picked it up was great.
Changed the tide
it every bit helps. It's part of the conversation, overall dialogue. And if we truly want change to happen in this world, it's going to happen in one conversation, one engagement at a time, one moment at that intersection between us and somebody else. So, at Good Faith Media, we're doing this. At Keeping the Faith Press, you're doing it. And so this is good stuff. You guys are producing some really great things. So Jonathan, blow us away. The mic is yours, my friend.
I don't know about blowing you away, but I will say this. The world is in desperate need of people who are willing to enter into the genuine ministry of reconciliation that God calls us to. That and if you want to do that, I want to help you. Cy wants to help you. I think Good Faith Media wants to help you. Like, there are actually tools out there for us to reflect the shalom that God has called us to. And so if you're sitting there on the precipice of being like, well, should I do something? The answer is yes. The question is not, should you do something? The question is, what should you do? That's the question. Mm-hmm. And I think if you're listening to this and you haven't already, a great next step is to go follow all the people in the KTF Press book, right? Like, Keeping the Faith, like, you will find somebody you can identify with and find somebody you're challenged by. It's impossible not to read something by Brandy Miller and David French and not be challenged. Like, it's hard, right? And so I think that's one thing. And the second thing would be, if you want to get to know us, I would love to invite you to do our Emotionally Healthy Activist curriculum. You can go to emotionallyhealthyactivist.com, go to ktfpress.com, get hooked up with our team. It'll be a good day.
That's awesome. Well, Cy, Jonathan, Everest, thank you so much for joining the pod today. It has been an absolute delight. Thank you so much for all that you're doing to continue this conversation and keeping the faith. You guys are doing great work.
Thanks. Same to you.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, we want to thank each and every one of you for tuning in this week. And as always, Autumn and I will be back in a couple of weeks. We're going to take Thanksgiving week off, and then we'll return as we approach our 100th episode in December. We're really excited about our 100th episode. So stay tuned. Thank you. So stay tuned to all that will transpire around that. Until next time, keep living good faith.